Thanks everybody for coming. Hi everyone. We're here to talk about open pedagogy. And so this presentation was adapted from the Open Education Network's Train the Trainer Intro to Pedagogy, Open Pedagogy workshop. So a lot of the slides were borrowed from them and it's open with Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 license. But we did add some extra materials to this as well. So here's our agenda. We're going to talk a little bit about what open pedagogy is, student agency and privacy, applying open pedagogy at UNM, the difference between traditional and renewable assignments, and then some examples of renewable assignments. And so we thought we would just ask you all, like, what's your name, title, where you're from, and why you're here in the chat. And so I'm Jennifer Jordan. I'm an OER librarian, and I am here because this was my idea. Well, no, it was also my idea with Sammy. And John is also here to help present about open pedagogy today. John Wheeler. So John is the data curation librarian at UNM, and also he's here to learn about applying open pedagogy. And then we have Val Nye at Santa Fe Community College. She wants to understand how open pedagogy connects with OER. That's great because that's why we're here today. Ashley Campbell, UNM Online. You're a previous high school teacher and you attend all the OER presentations. Thank you. Sammy Williams is here, OER Program Coordinator Extraordinaire, Administrator of the webinar too. And Marcy is here, Santa Fe Community College Book Arts Instructor, creating a new special OER project for book arts. Also, I think that your project and any of your projects, Marcy, would be great for open pedagogy. And I feel like maybe you're already applying some of that within your own work from what I've seen. Jen Laws is here. Yay, law librarian, e-resources scholarly, legal research teacher, and open pedagogy curious. We have Lori Turner here in photography and recipient of some OER grants. Amazing. So thanks everybody for being here. So what do we mean when we're talking about open? So when we're talking about open in this context, what we're talking about is openly licensed materials. So it's free. Open materials are free. And then they also give permissions to the creator. And I think I'm supposed to toss it to John now. So John, you want to take over?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you. Sure. And I'll go back here a slide a bit because, when we talk about free, the sort of the analogies we can make are the free puppy and the free beer and the free speech, where all of those things are free in some way or another, but they each come with different levels of uh, responsibilities and rights and responsibilities that you might have as a person who's engaging with that aspect of freedom. And in the case of OER and open pedagogical practices, what we mean when we talk about free is not only is the content or the object that we're creating or sharing or using free of cost, but it is free as in free speech, where as users, as creators, we have the right to copy something, to mix or remix it, to share it. There's variations in licensing and how we're able to do this. This is actually something we've talked about in several previous webinars, so we won't go into too much detail on it here. But again, it's Creative Commons licensing that is applied to a lot of open educational resources really allows textual rights to the creator, but also assign certain rights to the user as well. And in particular, when we think about open pedagogical practices and how we want to engage with learners and students in the creation of open content that they'll be creating and sharing themselves, is this idea of the 5 Rs, where through being free and open, our students, our learners, and the people who use the materials that we create, they're able to retain, reuse, revise, remix, and redistribute this open content. And part of the reason I wanted to join in on this webinar was to have an opportunity to talk about and require myself to learn a little bit more about some of the ethical and regulatory considerations that relate to working with students in open pedagogical practices, because a lot of what we're going to be talking about in addition to other aspects of open educational resources that we've talked about previously, a real focus about open pedagogy is how do we involve students? How do we give students agency to engage with the content, to create new material, and to really have a rich learning experience and demonstrate that learning through their own work. And thinking about what this means as an educator, one of the first things we want to reflect on is FERPA, which is the Federal Educational Rights and Privacy Act, which places a lot of constraints on how we, with students, can use their work, how we can share their work. It's something that I'm not going to go into a tremendous amount of detail, but the key point as it relates to open pedagogical practices is that FERPA protects student privacy, but it does not prohibit students from sharing their work. It's not a blanket prohibition against letting the world know that students have engaged in a particular course or produced a certain amount of work. It's really how we go about it with respect to, again, the learner's agency and their intention in being involved with a course and being involved with a project. And some familiar concepts that relate to this as far as working with students, we want to be mindful of informed consent, which can mean different things in different contexts. This picture here is one that I found when I was looking for images of informed consent. This is apparently the very first informed consent notice that we have a record of from the 16th century when a person in Eastern Europe agreed to have a medical procedure done on their child. And in the case of open pedagogical practices, what we really want to focus on is this idea about transparency. Be transparent with students about sharing their work. It's really something that you want to communicate to learners at the beginning of a class and at the beginning of a project and not at the end. So they should know what is being asked, what's expected, be able to provide necessary background on things like copyright and licensing. Help the students understand what their rights and responsibilities are as authors, let them know how their work may be shared, where it might be shared, and some alternatives that they may have to sharing, including sharing something anonymously or opting out. And again, these are all things that you want to present upfront to the students so that when the time comes to decide if they are going to share their work, they're able to do that with as much information as possible. And just as a touching on some of these topics, again, we have other webinars that we've done on licensing. There's lots of information out there. But again, the key point here is to emphasize that there's many different kinds of licenses that can be applied to open content. You really want to walk through all of the options with your learners so that they should, especially in a Creative Commons context, understand what the different Creative Commons licensing options are for them, what it means for them as creators and as users. And as mentioned, touching on this idea about making sure there are alternatives for learners. Students may choose to share their work anonymously, although I think one of the things we should be upfront with learners about when we talk about anonymity is that true anonymity online is very difficult to achieve. We can de-identify things, we can remove names and identifying characteristics from the things that we share, but there's never a 100% guarantee that somebody who has simply kept their name off of something is going to be anonymous. So that's another thing I think we need to be open and upfront about with our learners. And again, to recognize this idea that if a student chooses not to publicly share their work, they should not be penalized, and they should be provided with a comparable alternative assignment that is going to help them get the most out of engaging with the learning experience and demonstrate their learning. So open pedagogy can be a lot of fun. It's a great opportunity to work with students and share your knowledge and your expertise in a collaborative way, but we also wanted to sort of surface some of these ethical and professional considerations that we need to have when we work like this. Jennifer, I think oh, I will hand it back to Jennifer in a second. There are some resources here, and I just created the links because there's a slide later where we talk about this. But if you are, for example, interested in seeing a student permission form, example student authorization forms, different presentations that educators have given to learners that they've shared about how to talk to learners about the Creative Commons licensing. These two resources that are provided here, the Open Pedagogy Student Toolkit and the Open Education Network teaching and learning resources are very valuable with lots of great examples. Now I think I'm handing it back to Jennifer.
Yes, thank you. So, what is open pedagogy? So, this is from David Wiley and John Hilton. OER-enabled pedagogy is the set of teaching and learning practices that are only possible or practical in the context of the 5R permissions that are characteristic of OER. And so, what does that actually mean? When we're using open pedagogy, which can also be called open educational practices or OEP, it's when we're using OER to support learning, but also we're inviting students to be part of the teaching process, participating in the co-creation of knowledge. We're also making the learning environment more student-centered rather than teacher-centered, and we're valuing the knowledge and the experiences that our students bring to the classroom. When we're applying open pedagogy, we're engaging with students so that they're creating information rather than just consuming the material. It's experiential, it's hands-on, and students demonstrate understanding through creating materials and also sharing those materials. I think what's also important when you're using open pedagogy is that you create a safe classroom where your students feel comfortable to share their ideas. And so one way to do that is to use like ground rules in the beginning of class for how students will interact with one another. So why would we want to use open pedagogy? So the products of open pedagogy are student created and openly licensed so that they can live outside the classroom. It creates more sort of like weight for the materials that students are turning into the classroom. It creates higher stakes for students. So it's like they're creating something that they're not just going to share with the teacher. They're going to share it maybe with the world, with the classroom, with their peers. And so, in my experience as a teacher, when the stakes are higher for students, when they're not just sort of like regurgitating material for the teacher, when they're creating something and they're sharing it, they just put more time and effort into it. And we also have this example. So at UNM, this isn't out yet. But we have actually a faculty member at UNM who's working on a textbook that was created in collaboration with both graduate students and undergraduate students. And so that will be hopefully coming out maybe next year. But it's by Professor Kathy McKnight, and it's a Latin American Studies OER. And so she's called it the Untextbook Introduction to Latin America. So hopefully, sometime soon, maybe within the next year or two, we'll have that up on our website for people to check out. And so she actually got the idea for this from the Open Pedagogy Library Guide that I have up on the UNM website. So we could probably also put that up on the YouTube page for people to check out as well.
I was going to talk a little bit about assignments and how
Okay.
the practice of creating assignments and crafting assignments in open pedagogy is different from what we may be used to. And this is another thing I was interested in working on this presentation about because I used to be a middle school teacher, and that was a long time ago, but it has been an interesting reflection on how do we create work with students rather than just for students, and how do we create meaningful assignments. I can tell you we always thought we were creating like active learning, meaningful assignments, but I sort of wish that back in the day when I was a middle school teacher, that we had thought critically about some of these open pedagogical practices in the sense of traditional assignments versus more open, what we're calling renewable assignments. So if you think about how do we engage students and, like Jennifer said, raise the stakes a little bit so that it activates their learning and also gets them really engaged with an assignment. This idea of disposable assignments that I won't read the slide that's given here, but Dr. David Wiley had some interesting blog posts and interesting discussion about it, where it's the idea that a disposable assignment, a traditional assignment, is one that a teacher creates, the student completes it, the teacher grades it, the student receives the grade and essentially disposes of the assignment. They don't refer back to it later on. It's not something that's shared beyond the classroom. And as noted here, they're very transactional in nature. And we're going to invite you here to share examples in the chat of some examples of traditional assignments that you've implemented in your classrooms, that you have experienced as a learner in other environments, right? A lot of tests, bibliography, quizzes. While you're all typing in your answers, when I taught middle school, we had a great, wonderful assignment. It was a kind of a family history autobiography, and the students really got into it. They did great work and they were very invested in it. But it in the end, once it was done, it was done. I don't know that any of the students ever really valued it much beyond the experience of doing it. Lots of essays, hypothetical prompts, yeah, for discovery and reporting.
Can I just say, when I would do a traditional assignment, there was sometimes an outside audience because my mom would put it on the refrigerator when I got a good grade because I was a nerd.
And raising the stakes because everyone who came into the kitchen was going to see it. Yeah, and so a lot of the responses that are coming in here really relate to kind of this rote activity. It's a quiz, it's a memory test, something that is not really going to have permanence after the assignment is. So thank you all for sharing those thoughts. And here we have some contemporary examples of what we might consider to be traditional assignments, discussion boards, where a lot of these discussion boards they're private, if you will, to the learning environment, to the learning management system. Deliverables that get pitched after class. Here's one that again is based on strong practice, but writing reflections without connections to course material or a lot of transparency about why they matter, right? We do encourage reflection, we encourage reflective habits, but we also need to make sure that there's a connection to what's being learned and something that creates that sort of permanence for the learners. And things that we've seen here, right? Standard assignments, essays that nobody else is going to see or invest any kind of review in. And so, by contrast, we want to talk now about renewable assignments, which, like the best traditional assignments, which do provide our students with opportunities to engage in meaningful work, these renewable assignments give learners an opportunity to add value to the world, to put something out there that is going to not just demonstrate their learning, but that could become a learning resource for others. And here again, we want to emphasize this idea of the using these 5R activities, right? Retain, reuse, revise, remix, and redistribute through open educational practices and open educational license. And so here are some examples in a list. And where I like this is it can be similar to some of the traditional assignments that we've been talking about, but there's that idea of the openness and the sharing. So this first example, social annotation of a shared reading, that's the kind of assignment that we might often see as sort of a discussion board within a Canvas course or within a learning management system. But the fact that this is a social annotation and it's happening online using the hypothesis tool or Wikipedia or other social platforms for engaging in communication and sharing of ideas, that's the thing that makes this more open and more renewable. And other examples given here, the anthology, the idea of co-authoring an open textbook, like Jennifer was just talking about, this is also a common practice and a common approach. Writing those quiz questions, right? So quizzes are okay, they're fine, they accomplish a certain thing, but give the learners an opportunity to contribute to that part of the learning process. And other examples that are given here. And beyond the learning outcomes, which are crucial and they're important, and having students engage with the material, coming back to kind of our themes around why we support open educational resources, the value of open education in general is this idea of agency and belonging and helping students feel that they are represented within the class, within the materials that they encounter in the class, but also represented by the work that is accomplished through and during the class. So, as noted here, students were encouraged through open pedagogy by feeling that they belong in that environment, belong in that course. They're more likely to complete the first year of college, certainly, but additional years to make it through to graduation. And again, keep being intentional and keeping a student focus through open pedagogical practice is something that the research and the literature really reinforces. There's a benefit to the students beyond just saving the money. And to really kind of, I think, maximize the benefit for your learners is why we want to have this extra section on open pedagogical practices to involve learners, to get them invested in the outcomes, and to invite creativity. And so I won't read through this. This was a graphic I thought was very interesting about if we're new to this, we're thinking of different ways that we can create renewable assignments. There's just some kind of a graph here that gives kind of the most traditional type of assignments, like we were talking about the writing assignment with little or no scaffolding, the multiple choice quiz. And by increasing the level of audience engagement and diversifying the types of assignment, you have the highest level of student agency and creativity with things like contributing or editing to Wikipedia articles, which is both educational and social, and it requires people to develop and demonstrate expertise through that and some of these other examples, like writing the book chapters.
So here we just have some examples of renewable assignments. And this is also from the Open Education Network. So students editing a Wikipedia page. I think Wikipedia has a better reputation than it used to. I remember teachers used to be really sort of anti-Wikipedia, but I think that it's a great resource. The bibliographies can be really helpful. And then if you look at the format of a Wikipedia entry, it does require a lot of the like skills that are required in a composition class, like citation, summary. And so editing a Wikipedia, actually creating a whole Wikipedia entry is a lot harder than you might think. It has to go through several approval processes. So having students edit a Wikipedia page can be a valuable assignment for them. And so also you can edit Wikipedia pages for their content to add visibility of different groups, for example, women on Wikipedia, the internet at large. This assignment demonstrated to students how writing can move beyond the confines of the classroom and become a political act. So the problems addressed for this specific assignment were that the students didn't see themselves in the curriculum. And so students could use open pedagogy to address gender inequality. And then also, it treats students as co-creators in the knowledge creation process. And then Val said students editing pages helps create diversity in writing and perspective. So definitely. Students designed their final and a showcase. So this was from a celebration of what you know, United Nations Sustainable Development Goals for an Open Pedagogy Fellowship project. So for this assignment, students were asked to demonstrate their knowledge of the course by designing and completing their own final assignment. In the last few days of the semester, their work was showcased to their peers. I think that this also, I mean, I've asked students to create like discussion questions for class instead of just asking them the questions that are like at the end of a chapter in a textbook. Asking students to come up with their own discussion questions really kind of raises the stakes. It puts them kind of on the spot, makes them perform and demonstrate their knowledge. Students co-design a syllabus. So definitely we want to keep all of the required like language by our institutions within our syllabi, but I think syllabi can be kind of scary for students when they're going through them. There's all this like legal jargon, and then there's teacher words, right? Like the outcomes of the class that are maybe written for faculty instead of students. So allowing students to like explain and interpret what's like required of them in the course can be really helpful and a valuable assignment for them. So co-creating learning outcomes with students based on their goals for class can center them situate them at the center of your pedagogy. So the problems addressed here, students lack a sense of belonging and agency. They don't see themselves in the curriculum. And then so open pedagogy can be a solution because students have a voice in their learning. They're also co-creators in the knowledge creation process. I think if students don't fully understand the the outcomes that they're supposed to be achieving by the end of the course, that's a problem. So like helping students to decode that and then also bring their own ideas can be super helpful. And so here's another example where students co-created a textbook. So this is an ecological approach to obesity and eating disorders from Clemson University. And you can see like the students' names here. A bunch of different students helped to create this for a 400 level class. This can also help to raise the stakes for students, and I think also it's an opportunity for them to put their like writing out there. This could be valuable for their resumes and for their professional careers as well. And then also we have students write multiple choice questions for a question bank. So from the principles of social psychology, there were 35 students with 10 topics, and they created 1,400 questions. So this can really help students to exercise their brains. I think also people have used like AI to create question banks. There's different ways that you can create the content for your courses. And so open pedagogy is also another option for you as a faculty member. And then here's an example of a website created by Kim Johnson and Jess Schoenberg, open access teaching resources shared around the world. So this is just an example of open pedagogy resources for faculty who are out there. So problems addressed, students lack a sense of agency and community. Also having a free and open book can help students with costs. Open pedagogy helps students become co-creators in knowledge again. They're contributing to a specific discipline, and then they're creating also community amongst themselves. And like I mentioned before, it's important to create like a safe space for students. And so along with creating that safe space for students to express their ideas, they just sort of naturally become like this little community, and it can be a really awesome thing. And so, what open pedagogy does is it centers student agency, deconstructs traditional power structures, allows for deeper learning, those like metacognitive sort of things like reflection that are super important for students to think about, like where they started, where they ended up in the class. They can be co-creators, it centers students, contributes to knowledge beyond the assignment, creates an inclusive learning environment, and also demonstrates transparency for students so they understand like why they're learning what they are learning in the classroom, which can help to motivate them as well. And I say that just speaking from personal experience. And then, so this is from a research article, Open Pedagogy, a systematic review of empirical findings. And what the authors found that was that open pedagogy is a positive learning experience. Students appreciated developing artifacts that could be used by others. They feel agency. They help to enter like a scholarly discourse, which can help them develop better critical thinking skills. They're also thinking more broadly about like who their audience is, who's going to see their work, how are they going to be communicating with them, what rhetorical modes should they be using when they're creating that material. And then also students reported better perceptions of OER. So what do you think? What about open pedagogy resonates with you as an educator? And you can just put your answers in the chat if you like. And so for me personally, I think that I like the idea of raising the stakes for students where they don't feel like they're just sort of like writing something for the teacher. When I was a student, if I didn't like the teacher and I got their feedback, It gave me great pleasure to take that assignment and crumple it up and throw it in the trash when they gave it back to me. And so that's literally a disposable assignment. So Val says it brings in a student perspective, gives them real work to create, definitely. Jen said, I think the idea of creating an artifact, something useful that will benefit others in the future, is very powerful. I agree, especially if it has that open license on it. And Laura mentioned, I like how it supports student agency and addresses problematic hierarchies. Yes. And it supports the relevance and impact of the work because it is led by student needs and perspectives. Definitely. And then Ashley mentioned she likes the idea, but only if the instructor is interacting with the student, giving feedback and communications, especially with certain assignments. Right, because you don't want to like shift the burden of teaching the class onto the students, right? Because that would be way too much for them. It can also be more work for the teacher too. John said it's more work, but it's also more fun work. Here we just have information on where you can find more details about open pedagogy. So this URL, you can go to the Open Pedagogy portal. This is created through the Open Education Network, and there's lots of different resources that you can find on this page if you would like to consider using open pedagogy in your classrooms. Also, more resources for you if you would like to try out Open Pedagogy. There's the Open Pedagogy Student Toolkit, and this is by Jamie Whitman, who is also with the Open Education Network. And this is a really helpful guidebook that you can check out and get ideas for how to engage your students more with open educational practices. And so here are just some tips. So first of all, if you're an overachiever, you might go through this slide deck and feel overwhelmed right away. And so we just want to say don't do that. You can just start small. You can start with one change one assignment to just begin with and see how it goes. You could use an open educational practice framework to help you. You can learn from others. There's lots of materials out there. So the goal of this is to create active, authentic assessments that provide students with the choice and the option to do. They're often more motivated if they feel like they have a choice. Also, think about how does the assignment meet your learning outcomes? You definitely always want to be working toward those within your class. Think about like what do you want students to get out of the learning experience for that assignment? Also, you can consider other outside tools. Like for social annotation, there's different annotation apps that you might want to check out. And then also you can make sure to scaffold any new tools, concepts, or assignments, and then build in opportunities for knowledge transfer. So we have a question in the chat. What about the shy or insecure student that wants or needs lots of structure? Or the assignment discussed only within that class of peers and not openly. And so, like John mentioned earlier in the slideshow, if a student is really opposed to like sharing their work out there, then we can't force them to do that because that's not really fair. I think that shy students, I think creating that safe space for them where they feel the community to share their work, it starts within the classroom. And then, like, for that shy student, it could be an opportunity to help build up their confidence with sharing their work. But I do think there are some students for whom sharing their work, maybe they want to be anonymous for lots of different reasons. Maybe they don't want their name on the internet for lots of different reasons that we may not understand. So we can't force them to open up their materials. And then Ashley mentioned how should institutions handle consent and privacy when underage students, such as dual credit students, that are involved in public-facing open pedagogy assignments. So, and I don't know, John, what do you think? Well, I don't know about that one. I don't think we can have students authorize that, right?
Yeah, similar to the answer to the previous question, a lot of times offering learners multiple ways to participate can be it can help them achieve outcomes. It can be equally rewarding for them, and maybe that contribution is ultimately anonymous. In the case of underage learners, unless, well, I can't be giving any sort of legal advice, and I'm also not very well informed on the laws in this area. But I think it's certainly something to consult with the parents or the guardian about. If there was a waiver or permission or something that was permissible within the context of the course or the institution. Um, Ryan, there's a question to our law librarian, but thinking of ways to maximize the benefit and help learners get the most learning out of the experience without necessarily having to have their name on it.
Yeah, definitely. But those are great questions. Okay, and then here we have, well, I think there was an answer. So Jen mentioned, I think providing an offline or unpublished option for underage students would be essential, and she agrees with John's suggestion of a waiver for parents to review, but it would have to include details about what the assignment involves and what info would be publicly available. And then Ashley mentioned we have to take into account the Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment. PPRA requires that schools obtain parental consent before students share personal information in any publicly available platform. Definitely. But also within open pedagogy, it's not always necessarily like publishing it outside of the classroom, like creating discussion questions for the class, co-designing a syllabus. Those things don't require that consent either. And here's just a comparison of traditional versus renewable. So like a traditional assignment where students are engaging, right, in maybe their learning management system, where they post a response to the reading in response to classmates. The way that you can put a spin on it and make it more of a renewable assignment would be to just ask students to annotate part of the text that they struggled with, and then find a piece of media that relates to a passage that they read. Next slide, please. And then, so this is an example of a renewable assignment design framework. So, and like one of the previous slides said, in order to get started, you might want to apply a specific framework. So this framework says that you analyze and classify your current assignment, and then think about what meaningful OER contributions that students might be able to make. You can select the tools and repositories you might want to use to make that assignment more open. Um, Design intentional negotiations for openness. So talk about the assignment with your class and what it entails, and then finalize and reclassify that assignment with your students. So these steps could help you to create an assignment that includes students and makes them feel heard, right? If we're centering students, making them feel like agents, we're definitely not forcing them to do things they don't feel comfortable with. And then here's our renewable assignment spectrum. So renewable assignments are assignments that incorporate feedback, provide options, encourage ownership, have value beyond knowledge, and are shared with others. So, does anybody have additional questions from the great questions that you already asked in the chat about open pedagogy, open educational practices? You all had some really great questions. Has anybody tried open pedagogy in their classes? I've sometimes given it as an option, like for extra credit to start off small, where, I'll tell students like publish this somewhere and then you can get extra credit, and that can be another way to start bringing it into your classroom, maybe without totally changing things. Let me see. And so Jen said, this has been so helpful and thought-provoking. I've not used OEP, but I think I will start with the editing on Wikipedia. And then Laura said she's used it some, particularly with graduate and research students. And there's a question for John.
The question is, how do we guide assignments that involve collaboration to keep them productive? And one of the things that I would suggest, two things, there's sort of like a what you might consider a global environmental way of treating each other within the classroom by starting out each year or each class with a code of conduct. about how the learners are going to engage with each other, what counts as respectful interactions, demonstrations of respectful interactions, and then modeling these expectations and behaviors as instructors and encouraging the learners to model it. So at sort of a very high level, you're creating what is hopefully an open and productive environment that is going to be welcoming of collaboration so that learners who may feel hesitant or not fully engaged yet will understand that their contributions are going to have value and be valued in an active, safe way. And within the assignment to also set that expectation, and this feels like I'm falling back on my standard answer, but within a collaboration, make sure that there are roles and different ways for learners to engage within that collaboration. If one person is particularly strong at, you know, synthesizing the discussion, make sure they have that opportunity to do that. If another learner is really gung ho to do some of the research or the investigation, uh, diagramming processes, just working with the learners to understand to find ways for them to bring their strengths into the collaboration. So I don't know if that's a terrific answer, but it's what I have practiced in the.
So, thanks everybody for coming to our sessions during our spring workshop series.